The thing nobody tells you about living quietly is that it makes you easy to overlook, right up until the moment somebody needs a place to land. Then suddenly, you're the only lit window on the street. That's what I was thinking at 12:40 in the morning, when somebody started pounding on my door hard enough to make the picture frames jump, and a voice I half recognized said through the wood, "Please, I'm locked out, and I really don't want to be alone tonight. I want to tell you everything that happened after I opened that door. But first, I have to tell you why I almost didn't. My name is Daniel Pryor. I'm 37 and I fix things for a living, not houses, not cars, instruments, violins mostly, and the occasional stubborn cello that some teenager dropped down a flight of stairs. I run a little repair bench out of the spare room in my apartment, the kind of work where you sit under a lamp for 9 hours, and the loudest sound in the room is your own breathing. I tell people I chose the trade because I loved music. The truth is I chose it because it let me be useful without being seen, and after the year I'd had, invisible felt a lot like safe. I'd moved into that building 11 months earlier, the bottom unit of a converted house on a dead-end street where the rain ran loud through the gutters every spring. 3 apartments stacked over a shared porch, old radiators that clanked like they were arguing, and neighbors who mostly waved and kept walking. That suited me. After my marriage ended quietly the way a candle goes out, no drama, just less and less warmth, until one day there was none. I'd gotten very good at the kind of life that asks nothing of anyone. No dinners I had to host, no phone that rang after 9, just me, the lamp, the smell of varnish and old wood, and a routine I could have performed in my sleep. The woman in the unit above me was named Cora Vance. I knew that much because of the mailbox, and because she'd once knocked to ask if I could turn down a recording I was playing to test the resonance on a repaired viola. She'd been polite about it, apologetic even, standing there in scrubs with her hair coming loose, holding a travel mug like it was the only thing keeping her upright. A nurse, I figured, by the lanyard and the exhaustion. We'd exchanged maybe 40 words total in 11 months. I knew her footsteps better than her face. She came home at strange hours, walked soft, and sometimes I'd hear her pacing late, back and forth across the floor above my workbench, a slow rhythm that I'd come to find oddly comforting, without ever once asking myself why. So that's who was on the other side of the door when the pounding came. I knew it before I looked. I'd have known those footsteps coming up the porch anywhere. The storm had been building all evening. One of those late March systems that can't decide whether it's snow or rain, so it commits to both and adds wind for cruelty. The power had flickered twice already. I'd been at my bench finishing a rehair on a bow for a client who needed it Monday, and I'd told myself I'd work until 1 and then sleep. I had no reason to expect anyone. Nobody knocks at midnight unless something has gone wrong. I opened the door. Cora stood under the porch light, and the word that came to me first wasn't wet. It was undone. She was soaked through, her coat plastered flat, her dark hair sending little rivers down the side of her face, her shoes making that hopeless squelch that means you've been outside far too long. But it was her expression that stopped me. She had the look of someone holding very still, because moving might cost more than she had left. "Daniel," she said. "Right? It's Daniel." "Yeah." I stepped back without thinking. "Come in. Come in. I locked myself out." She said it fast, like a confession she'd rehearsed in the rain. "My keys are upstairs. The landlord's got the only spare, and he doesn't answer after 10, and I tried the office line, and..." Her voice caught, then steadied with visible effort. "And it's freezing, and the bus stopped running, and I didn't know where else to." "It's fine," I said. "It's fine. You don't have to explain the whole thing on my doorstep." That stopped her. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. That she wasn't going to have to earn entry with a complete account of her failures. She stepped inside, and I shut the door against the wind, and the radiator clanked once like a verdict. For a second we just stood in my small front room, both of us a little stunned by the proximity. I'd lived above and below this woman for almost a year, and never once been within arm's reach of her. Up close, she was younger than her exhaustion made her seem, maybe early 30s, with the kind of face that probably laughed easily when it wasn't this tired. "You're shaking," I said. "It's the cold." "It's not just the cold," I said, before I could decide whether that was too much, but okay. She looked at me then, really looked, and I watched her recalibrate the way people do when someone says the true thing instead of the polite thing. "No," she admitted. "It's not just the cold." I got her a towel, the good one, the one I never used, and a dry sweatshirt from my closet, gray and worn soft, and pointed her to the bathroom. While she changed, I put the kettle on the gas burner because the electric stove felt like tempting fate with the power flickering, and I added a log to the little wood stoves installed against the building manager's advice and the city's preferences. By the time she came back out, the room had started to glow, and she looked less like a woman the storm had spit up, and more like a person again. "Tea or coffee?" I asked. "I have decaf if you actually want to sleep tonight, or regular if you want to be honest about the fact that you won't." That got the smallest movement at the corner of her mouth. "Regular," she said. I gave up lying to myself about sleep a long time ago. I made 2 mugs. She wrapped both hands around hers and sat at the edge of my couch like she wasn't sure she was allowed to take up the whole cushion. The wind threw a fistful of sleet at the window. Somewhere a transformer popped and the lights browned and came back. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is so far past appropriate. Banging on a near stranger's door in the middle of the night." "I'd have done the same," I said. "Probably worse. I'd have apologized so much you'd have wanted to lock me back out." She laughed, a real one, brief and surprised, like it had escaped before she could catch it. "You're funnier than your footsteps suggest." "My footsteps have a terrible personality. I've been working on it." She smiled into the steam, and for a moment the apartment held a quiet that wasn't awkward, just full. I should have left it there. A locked-out neighbor, a warm room, a kindness done and a night survived, but I'd lived under this woman's pacing for 11 months, and there was a question in me that wouldn't sit still. "Cora," I said, "can I ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business?" She tensed, just slightly. "Depends on the something. You weren't really locked out." "Not the way you said. The room went very still. The fire ticked." She set her mug down on my coffee table with a care that told me my guess had landed somewhere true, and she didn't look at me when she answered. "How would you know that?" "Because the locked out part is true, I believe that," I said. "But people who lock themselves out are annoyed. They're embarrassed. They're cold. I stopped, choosing. "You looked like you'd been standing in the rain for a long time before you ever tried my door. Longer than it takes to realize you don't have your keys." She was quiet for so long I thought I'd overstepped, the kind of silence that makes you start composing an apology. Then she pulled the sleeves of my sweatshirt down over her hands and said, in a voice gone flat and careful, "I've been sitting in my car since 9. I didn't say anything. I'd learned, the hard year I'd had, that the most useful thing in the world is sometimes just leaving a space open and not rushing to fill it." "I got off shift at 8, she said. "I drove home, I parked, and then I couldn't make myself go up the stairs." She finally looked at me, and her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the firelight. "Because today is the day my brother died, 2 years ago, and I knew if I went up to that empty apartment I was going to spend the whole night with it, and I couldn't do it again. So I sat in the car until the cold got worse than the loneliness, and then I really was locked out because my keys were on the hook by my door, where I always leave them, like an idiot, because I wasn't thinking. I was just trying not to drown." The wind screamed against the corner of the house. I felt the words settle in the room like furniture being set down. "I'm sorry," I said. And then, because the easy version felt cheap, "What was his name?" She blinked. People apparently didn't ask her that either. "Theo," she said. "Theodore. But nobody called him that except our mother when she was furious. Theo. He was 26. She turned the mug a quarter turn on the table. A small ritual. He was the loud one, I was the quiet one. He used to say I was the only person who could make silence feel like a conversation. Her voice frayed. He'd hate that I sat in a car all night. He'd have dragged me out by the ankle and made me eat something terrible and laugh, against my will. What happened? I asked. If you want to say. Car accident, she said. Not even a dramatic one. A wet road. A curve he'd driven 1,000 times. A deer or a phone or a second of nothing. They never figured out which. He was driving home from my apartment, actually. He'd come over because I'd had a bad week and he didn't want me to be alone. She laughed, but it broke in the middle, so you can see why empty apartments and bad nights are a complicated combination for me. I sat with that, the terrible symmetry of it, her brother dying after coming to keep her from being alone, and her now, 2 years on, knocking on a stranger's door because being alone was the one thing she couldn't survive. I understood suddenly why she paced, why she came home at strange hours, why 11 months of soft footsteps had carried a rhythm I'd found comforting without knowing it was grief, walking circles above my head. I lost the version of my life I thought I was building about 1.5 years ago, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out because she'd handed me something true and it felt wrong to keep my own hands empty. Not death. My wife and I, it ended, but the part that wrecked me wasn't her leaving. It was how quiet the apartment got. I'd lived there 4 years and I'd never once heard the refrigerator hum until she was gone. After that, I could hear everything. The hum, the pipes, the clock, my own pulse. I moved here partly because I couldn't stand a place where I'd memorized the silence. Cora studied me. Is that why you play those recordings so loud? Testing the instruments? That's the official reason, I said. The unofficial reason is that an apartment with sound in it feels like an apartment somebody lives in. Something passed between us then, a recognition. Two people who'd each, in their separate ways, lost the trick of being alone and had built whole architectures around hiding it. I should let you sleep, she said, but she didn't move. I wasn't going to sleep anyway, I said. I had a bow to finish, and honestly, after all that, I think I'd just lie there listening to the refrigerator. So unless you want to be alone, which I'd understand, you're welcome to stay up. I have terrible movies, worse snacks, and a couch that's more comfortable than it looks. She looked at me for a long moment, weighing something I couldn't see. Okay, she said finally. And it was the same word I'd heard her say once before, the night she'd knocked to ask me to turn the music down. Except this time, it sounded like a door opening instead of closing. What followed was the strangest, gentlest night I'd had in years. We didn't do anything remarkable. That's the part I keep coming back to. There was no grand gesture, no swelling music, no moment where the lights came up and everything was different. There was a wood stove, 2 mugs that became 4, and 2 people who'd forgotten what it felt like to be in a room with someone who wasn't performing fine. I made grilled cheese at 1 a.m. because she admitted she hadn't eaten since noon, and she watched me butter the bread with an expression of deep professional concern as if she were assessing a patient's vitals. You're using too much butter, she said. There is no such thing. I'm a nurse. I have seen the inside of arteries, and I'm a craftsman. I have seen the inside of a Stradivarius copy that survived a house fire. We both know things. Let me cook. She laughed, and the sound filled the corners of the room, and I thought, not romantically, not yet, just gratefully, that's better. The apartment sounds like somebody lives in it. We talked about Theo. She told me he'd been a terrible musician who insisted on playing guitar at every family gathering, 3 chords and total confidence, and how she'd give anything to hear him butcher a song one more time. I told her about my work, about how every instrument that comes across my bench has a history written in its scratches, and how my job is mostly to fix what's broken without erasing the proof that it was lived with. She got quiet at that. That's a kinder way to think about damage than I'm used to, she said. It's the only way that's ever made sense to me, I said. You can't sand a thing back to before it was hurt. You can only make it able to sing again. She looked at me across the firelight, and I watched her file that away somewhere it mattered. Around 2:30, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her whole posture changed, the warmth draining out of her face, replaced by something braced and weary. "You okay?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. A message from someone saved as Mom. "Are you home safe? I know what today is. Call me. Don't sit alone with it like last year. I worry." "Last year," Cora said quietly, "I did exactly what I did tonight. Sat in my car for hours. Except last year I didn't have anywhere to knock. So I just sat there until 4 in the morning, and then went up to the empty apartment anyway. My mom found out because a neighbor saw my car running. She's been terrified of this date ever since." "Are you going to call her? It's almost 3 in the morning." She said, "Call her," I pointed out, "and she's awake. Mothers who send that text at 3 a.m. are not asleep." Cora stared at the phone. Then she did something I didn't expect. She handed it to me. "Will you stay while I call? I don't want to do it alone, and I don't. I'm not ready to be alone yet, even on the phone." So I stayed. I sat across the room, close enough to be there, far enough to give her the privacy of it, and I watched Cora Vance call her mother at 3 in the morning and say, in a voice that started fractured and slowly steadied, "Hi, Mom. I'm safe. I'm not at home exactly. It's a long story. I'm with a neighbor, a good one." A pause. "Yeah, I'm not alone. I promise I'm not alone." When she hung up, her eyes were wet, but it was a different wet than before. The kind that comes after something releases instead of breaks. "She cried," Cora said. "Good crying. She's been holding her breath for 2 days." She wiped her face with the sleeve of my sweatshirt. "Thank you. I couldn't have done that in the car." "You did it," I said. "I just sat here." That's the whole trick of it, I think. Most of the time, people don't need rescuing. They just need a witness so they can rescue themselves. She looked at me for a long beat. "Where did you learn that?" "The hard way," I said. "Same place. Everybody learns the things worth knowing." We watched a movie after that, something old and ridiculous that neither of us paid attention to. At some point, she fell asleep on the far end of the couch, mid-sentence, the way exhausted people do when they finally feel safe enough to stop fighting it. I didn't wake her. I got the spare blanket from the cedar chest by the window and laid it over her. And then I went back to my bench and finished the bow, working by lamplight in the next room with the door open, listening to the storm soften and a stranger breathe in my front room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a year and a half. I felt like my apartment was a place somebody lived in. The storm broke just before dawn. I watched the sky go from black to the bruised gray that means the worst is over, and I made coffee, and the smell of it woke her. She sat up, disoriented, blanket around her shoulders, hair a catastrophe, and for one unguarded second before she remembered where she was, she looked completely at peace. Then she remembered, and the apologies started up again. Oh no, what time is it? I fell asleep. I'm so sorry. It's 6, I said, handing her a mug. You slept 3 hours. That's a victory. Drink this and stop apologizing, or I'll start charging you per apology, and you can't afford me. She took the coffee. She looked at me over the rim of it, and the morning light made everything plainer and somehow braver. "I don't know how to thank you for this," she said. "You don't have to." "No, I do, because you didn't just give me a couch, you—" She struggled for it. "You asked his name. Do you know how long it's been since someone asked me his name instead of asking if I was okay? Everyone asks if I'm okay. You asked who I lost. That's the whole difference, and I don't think you even know you did it." I did know. But I let her have the thought. The landlord's office opened at 8. I walked her up to her own door. 2 flights I'd heard her climb 100 times and never once accompanied, and waited while the spare key turned and her apartment opened up, dark and waiting, and full of 2 years of a date she couldn't outrun. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. "It's still empty," she said quietly. "The apartment. It's going to be empty when I go in there." "Yeah," I said. "It is, but it's morning now. And you got through the night, and you don't have to do the next bad night in a car. You know where the porch light is." She turned and looked at me, and something settled in her face. A decision, small and real. "Daniel," she said, "would you want to get coffee sometime?" "Actual coffee." somewhere with chairs and a menu and no storm. I'd like to thank you in a way that doesn't involve me crying on your couch at 3 in the morning." "I'd like that," I said, although for the record, the crying was fine. I have a high tolerance. It's a quiet apartment. I've got room for it, she laughed. The full one, the one I'd heard fill the corners of my front room, and it carried down the stairwell. And I thought of Theo, the loud brother, the one who'd said she could make silence feel like a conversation, and I thought he'd probably have approved of a man whose whole job was teaching broken things to sing. I'd like to tell you it was simple after that. It wasn't, exactly. Grief doesn't get politely out of the way just because something good shows up. There were nights, in the months that followed, when Cora went quiet for days, when the date of some other anniversary I didn't know about would arrive, and I'd hear the pacing start up again above my workbench. The difference was that now, when it got bad enough, she knocked, and I'd open the door, and we wouldn't even have to talk. Sometimes she'd just sit on the couch with a mug and the fire going while I worked at my bench in the next room, and the sound of a person living in the building would be enough for both of us. We did get the coffee, and then dinner, and then a slow, careful, terrified building of something neither of us quite trusted at first, because we'd both learned the hard way how quiet a life gets when the thing you built falls apart. We went slow. We said the true things instead of the polite ones, because that had been the whole foundation of the first night. And neither of us wanted to start lying now. She introduced me to her mother about 4 months in, a small, fierce woman who took my hand in both of hers and held it a beat too long and said, "You're the neighbor, the one who answered the door." Like it was the most important fact about me. Maybe it was. On the second anniversary I knew about, the third since Theo, the first one we faced together, I didn't let her sit in any cars. I made her terrible food and put on a recording of something Theo would have tried to play badly, and we sat in my front room with the windows open to a softer spring, and she told me stories about her brother, until we were both laughing and crying in the same breath, which she told me was the only honest way to remember the dead. "He'd have liked you," she said that night. "He'd have made fun of you mercilessly. The violin thing, the butter, all of it. But he'd have liked you. He always said the quiet ones were the ones to watch. Smart man, the smartest." She leaned into my shoulder. "Thank you for asking his name. Stop thanking me." "Never," she said. "It's load-bearing. The whole thing started with you asking the right question. I'm not letting you forget you did one thing right." A year after the storm, Cora gave up her apartment upstairs, not to move in with me. We weren't reckless, and we'd both seen what happens when you rush a thing that needs time to cure. She moved into a place across town with real light, and a second bedroom she turned into a little studio, because somewhere in that year she'd started painting, badly and joyfully. The way her brother had played guitar, the first thing she ever finished was a small canvas of a porch light burning in the dark, and she hung it in my workshop above the bench, and she never once explained it to anyone who asked, and neither did I. We got married 2.5 years after the night she knocked. Small ceremony. Her mother cried the good kind of crying. There was an empty chair at the front that everyone understood and no one mentioned, and at the reception somebody played 3 chords on a guitar with total confidence and zero skill. On purpose, and Cora laughed until she had to sit down. These days the apartment is never quiet, and I've stopped needing to play recordings to convince myself someone lives here. The refrigerator still hums. I just can't hear it anymore over everything else. Sometimes, on stormy nights, the rain runs loud through the gutters the way it did that March, and Cora will reach over and take my hand without either of us saying anything, and I'll think about the version of me who almost didn't open the door. The man who'd gotten so good at being invisible that he nearly let the only lit window on the street go dark just to avoid being needed. I think about how the whole rest of my life came in soaked to the bone at 12:40 in the morning, said she didn't want to be alone, and stood on the other side of the door, waiting to find out if anyone was home. Somebody was, just barely. But somebody was. So tell me, what would you have done if your neighbor knocked at midnight, drenched and locked out and unable to say the real reason she couldn't go home alone? Would you have opened the door or told yourself it wasn't your business? And have you ever had a single ordinary night? No plan, no warning. Turn out to be the night your whole life quietly changed direction? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.